Hello and welcome back. Let us get started with ChatGPT prompts. We want to understand how to talk to AI effectively. But to do that, we need to first understand what even are prompts. A prompt, we can say, is the input or instruction that we give to AI. And then the AI responds based on how clearly and specifically you described what you want. You can think of prompts as commands or questions that simply guide the AI. Now, why do prompts matter for us? Well, clear prompts equal to better, more accurate answers, while vague prompts are pretty much generic and less useful responses. So, an important thing to understand is that the quality of your output depends on the quality of your input. Now, when it comes to prompts, there are several different types of prompts. We can divide them first based on the prompt's simplicity. So we have simple prompts, which are one short question or command. For example, let's say you ask ChatGPT, what is penetration testing? That would be considered a simple prompt. And we also have elaborate prompts, which are detailed instruction with context. An example would be explain penetration testing in simple terms, list 3 common tools and provide one practical example, and bunch of other rules and constraints applied to that prompt. That would be an elaborate prompt. We can also divide the prompts onto short and detailed prompts. Now, short prompt will give you a quick answer, but may be missing details, while detailed prompt will take longer to answer, but it will give you more complete and accurate results. So you get the idea. You know what prompts are, you know that the more accurate the prompt is, the more accurate the response will be, but you may be asking, well, what's the point of prompting in cybersecurity? How is that useful for us? Well, prompts in cybersecurity can be used for various different things. For example, we can use prompts to explain security concepts. You might want to learn about something. You might want to ask ChatGPT about something security related. It can explain it to you, and you can save a lot of time instead of just Googling your problem or Googling the solution. ChatGPT or any other large language model or AI tool could give it to you much faster. Now, you can also use it to write commands or scripts. Let's say you want to create a reverse shell, but you don't know how. Or you know how, but you're missing certain steps. You can ask ChatGPT. It will output the code in whichever language you want. Now, of course, ChatGPT is made to not answer certain questions. So, for example, if you ask it, create a reverse shell, it will decline that request and it won't do it because it considers it unethical. But there are certain ways you can trick ChatGPT, and we will take a look at that later. Now, also, prompting in cybersecurity is useful to analyze logs or network traffic, for example. Let's say you have a huge log file and you don't want to go through it on your own. You can simply just write a rule or write a prompt to ChatGPT to analyze the entire log file and extract the useful information that you're looking for. However, once again, make sure you double check everything because you should never fully rely on ChatGPT or any AI tool in general. And lastly, we can simulate attacks for learning. You can tell ChatGPT to go step by step through any type of the attack that you want. For example, let's say there is a device on your network and it's vulnerable to a certain FTP vulnerability. You can tell ChatGPT to give you all the steps to exploiting that specific vulnerability, and it will do so. Now, of course, it won't always be correct what ChatGPT outputs to you, but you can always alter the commands and code that ChatGPT gives you to make it work. And lastly, let us define the golden rules for prompting. We already mentioned, be clear and specific. You also want to give context. Tell AI the role. For example, start the prompt with "You are a cybersecurity expert," and then continue with other rules in your prompt. If it is a bigger task, you want to break that big task into smaller instructions, step by step. And lastly, don't forget to experiment. Always try different phrasing until you get the results that you want. Remember, prompts are your main weapon when using AI for ethical hacking. The better your prompt, the better your results. Okay, so in the next lecture, we will practice crafting and running prompts for certain ethical hacking and cybersecurity tasks. See you in the next lecture. Hello, and welcome back. It's time we start digging our hands into ChatGPT and AI in general. So, we already mentioned few key things in the last lecture. The key takeaways are, if you remember, prompts are your main weapon when using AI for ethical hacking, and the better your prompt, the better your results, right? But there are three things that you must consider which are prompted to us as soon as we open ChatGPT. Now, first of all, for those of you who don't know or have never used ChatGPT, you just open up your Google Chrome or whatever engine you're using, type ChatGPT, and the first link, you click on it, create an account, and it should open up this window after you create an account. Now, I have created a new account specifically for this course, and in order for us to see this better, let me just zoom everything in like this, and let's read through these three things. Ask away. ChatGPT can answer questions, help you learn, write code, brainstorm together, and much more. Now, very important thing, don't share sensitive info. Chat history may be reviewed or used to improve our services. And check your facts. Maybe even more important thing, don't rely on ChatGPT alone. Remember, we talked about this. ChatGPT should only be a tool. It shouldn't be your first source of information or the source that you rely on the most. It says right here, while we have safeguards, ChatGPT may give you inaccurate information. It's not intended to give advice. Alright, now that we have these three things in our mind, let's click on OK and let's go. So here is ChatGPT. Here is where we type our prompts. So if I type hello, the ChatGPT will answer back. It will say, hey, how it's going? But we're not really interested in chatting with ChatGPT, right? We want to use it for our advantage during our ethical hacking and penetration testing. So how can we do that? Well, before we even start typing any prompts for hacking or for penetration testing, what I want you to do is I want you to navigate to your VirtualBox. I want you to navigate to the settings of your Kali Linux virtual machine, and I want you to change the network settings from NAT to bridged adapter, or to NAT network, but bridged adapter preferably, because only then will you manage to scan the devices inside of your local network. Once again, change to bridged adapter, make sure virtual cable is connected, and under the bridged adapter, make sure you select the correct interface which you want to use. For me, it automatically selects it. For you, it might also automatically select the correct one. And once you set this up, you want to click on OK. Alright, now it will not automatically change, as if I open the terminal in my Kali Linux machine and type ifconfig, I will still have the NAT IP address, which is 10.0.2.15. But if I click on this icon and click on disconnect, and then I click on wired connection 1, once again, I clear the terminal, type ifconfig again. Now I will have a local IP address that will belong to my local network. And now I can communicate with the devices that are on my network. So for example, if I try to ping my router, which in my case is this IP address, it will work. It wouldn't work while I was on NAT, alright? Now, why is this important? Well, we're going to be running a few commands that ChatGPT tells us, which will be focused on scanning the network. You already know, most of you already come from ethical hacking and penetration testing background, so you already are familiar with various tools that we will use. For this specific section, I'm going to be using Metasploitable 3 Windows Server virtual machine that I will use to scan. Now you can either use the same virtual machine, I will leave resources on how you can install it in the VirtualBox and use it as well, or you can simply just use whatever machine you want. You can use Metasploitable 2, you can use the Linux version of Metasploitable 3, you can scan your own router, laptop, mobile phone, whichever device you have on your network that you have permission to scan, feel free to scan with the commands that we will get from ChatGPT. Alright, so I'm going to double check whether Metasploitable 3 is also on bridged adapter, and it is. Now keep in mind, this is not a safe environment. Metasploitable 3 is a vulnerable virtual machine, and therefore pay attention to when you're using bridged adapter. Only use it in your home and safe environment. Do not run Metasploitable 3 or any other vulnerable virtual machine in an environment that you do not know. Since I'm in a safe environment in my home network, I can start Metasploitable 3 and leave it running in the background. Okay, now let's start with the first prompt. Now, there's something that you should know when it comes to ChatGPT. There is bad prompt and there is good prompt. In this case, we're going to showcase bad versus good prompt for safe host discovery. Let's see how the prompt quality changes and the command that we get, how it changes once we use both of the prompts. So first of all, what I need you to do after you have changed your Kali Linux network settings to bridged adapter, you want to type this command in your Kali Linux. IP-4 A and then pipe grep-eo quotes inet and then some regex -9 backslash dot close brackets plus 0-9 plus and close quotes and then pipe again sed and then under the quotes we type s/net space / and then the quote at the end. Now this command will give you your lab subnet or the subnet of your Kali Linux machine, in case you don't know it yet. In case you know it, you do not need to run this command, but if you don't know it, running this command will give you the IP address of your Kali Linux machine. And by the IP address, you will also know what your subnet is. You can also, once again, much simpler way would be to type ifconfig and check the IP address like that. Okay, so let's start with two simple prompts. If I type in ChatGPT, give me an nmap command for a network, it will give me an output, right? And it will give me an output for, in this case, accurate local network subnet. But that is because ChatGPT got lucky and because this is a quite common subnet to find in a local network. It could have given me a different subnet. It just says, for example, if your local network is this one, you can use and then the command nmap-sp. It also gives us description of all the options that it used. For example, in this command there is -ss, -sv, -t4 and the subnet. But this is what we consider a bad prompt. Nothing has been really detailed to ChatGPT for it to know exactly what it needs to do. It luckily guessed the subnet, so if it gave a different IP address and you scanned a different IP address from its command by just copying the code and running it in your terminal, you could get in trouble for scanning unauthorized IP addresses or devices that you do not have permission to scan. So what would be an example of a good prompt? Let's go like this. Now, there is a little bit of typing, but this is what is considered to be a good prompt. this is what we tell ChatGPT. You are a security assistant for Kali Linux lab, right? And we're going to propose it with a task. Task will be propose one safe host-discovery command to find live hosts on subnet, and then we provide it with a subnet of our own network. In my case, that will be this one. Right? This is the same subnet that it provided in this chat. However, this was ChatGPT just being lucky. It could have been a different subnet. So we want to precisely tell it which subnet we are on. In your case, this might be different, so make sure to change it. If it's different, don't just type what I typed. And that is pretty much the task. Now, what are the constraints? Now, what do you mean by constraints? Well, ideally, we also want to tell it what it shouldn't do. For example, we want it to test lab only. Do not scan outside of this subnet. We also ideally want runtime to be, let's say, less than 3 minutes on a laptop. We don't want to be running, or we don't want the ChatGPT to give us a command which will take hours to finish or 30 minutes to finish. We want something that will finish fast. Now, usually, since this is just a host discovery command on a local network, it will finish quite fast, preferably ideally in less than 10 seconds, but we still want to give it constraints for any other commands that we might run later. Let's also type be conservative with flags. So no intrusive scripts or flags. We don't want to run anything that would be considered intrusive to other hosts. And we want to type it to explain each flag, which it already did in this example, but we also want to type it so that it knows to explain flags in one sentence. We don't want too long of a description. And the output format is also something that you can provide. Let's type it a single code block with the command. That is the output format that we want for the command. Under that, we want then one sentence explaining why these flags are safe in a lab. Alright, so this is our good prompt. It will most likely give similar output to the previous bad prompt, but that is just because this is a simple command. Now, you do notice that it does give a short output. That is because we gave it the output format. We only want a single code block with a command, and we want one sentence explaining why these flags are safe and used in a lab. So, since we're only using the -sn flag, it only gives the explanation for that flag. The -sn flag disables port scanning and only performs host discovery, which is ping/arp, making it safe and fast way to find live hosts in a lab subnet. Now we can double check whether -sn really does that by typing nmap --help. We can search for the -sn command in our terminal, which I have no clue where it is. Okay, so here it is. Ping scan, it disables port scan, right? So that's exactly what ChatGPT said. Flag disables port scanning and only performs host discovery. That is a good command. This, however, is not a good command for discovering hosts on the network. This is why this is a bad prompt and this is a good prompt, because we detail what exactly we want from ChatGPT to give us. So once we run this, we can copy the command, clear our terminal, and run the scan. It will start the scan, and while it's working, let's just enlarge the terminal a little bit so we can see everything better, and here it is. So it gives us output for the hosts that are online and running. We get the host 192.168.1.1, which is this host, which in this case is my router. It's up and running. The .1.2 is also up. The .1.6 is up. The .1.9, which seems to be a mobile phone, and that is also up. Another mobile phone seems to be also up. And .1.12, we already know to be Metasploitable 3 virtual machine because I started it. It's in the background and it's running. So this is a Metasploitable 3 Windows server. And the last one, which is .1.11, is our Kali Linux virtual machine. So all of these hosts are up and running, and ChatGPT gave us accurate command. Alright, but what else can we do with Kali Linux? Well, let's try to build a mini reconnaissance plan that will have a strict output format similar to this prompt that we typed right here. So how can we do that? We want to use a strict prompt to get a short plan which we can run step by step. So let's continue with the same intro sentence. You are a security assistant for a Kali Linux lab. Your task will be to produce a 3-step host recon plan for subnet, and then let's paste our subnet, which in my case is once again this one. This will be the task for this prompt. Now let's type constraints once again. Constraints should be lab only. Once again, do not scan anything outside of this subnet. We also want to keep commands safe and fast. Let's also prompt it for a few steps. So step 1, host discovery only. Then we provide it with step 2. For 1 found host, identify top open ports quickly. Step 3. For that same host, grab lightweight version info for those ports. So this is in constraints because these are the steps that we want to take. We don't want anything else outside of these steps. You can also try putting them in task and see whether you will get the same prompt back. Now, these are the 3 steps. We also want to avoid any intrusive scripts, so we can try typing avoid intrusive NSA scripts, which are scripts for Nmap, and output format. We can type output format to be, let's open the brackets, exactly this markdown table, and we can type the markdown table right here. So let's type it like this: step command y and save question mark in brackets yes/no. This will be our markdown table, and we want it to output it exactly like this. Okay, so this is our output format, and this is our entire prompt. These are the steps that we want to take. Let's see what ChatGPT gives us. Alright, awesome. We got step 1, step 2, and step 3. And we got the exact markdown table as we prompted right here. We got step, command, y, and safe yes or no. So all 3 are safe, and that is because we mentioned keep commands safe and fast. But remember, ChatGPT can sometimes give you inaccurate information. So you need to double check everything that it gives you. It did create a correct markdown table. It did give us the 3 correct steps. But now let's check the information that it gave us. So the first command is the same command that we already ran, which is host discovery command. It says performs host discovery only ping/arp to list live hosts without scanning ports. Is it safe? Yes. So this is correct. We already ran this previously, and it gave us the output of all the hosts which are up on my local network. The second step is, for one found host, identify top open ports quickly. And now it gives us nmap -- top ports 10, which is target host. So this, we can argue whether this is what we wanted. Is it our fault or ChatGPT fault? Well, first of all, we didn't specify top how many ports we want to scan. So ChatGPT assumed we want 10 ports. Maybe we wanted 100 ports or top 1000 ports, right? So this is a number that we can change. The target host is not an IP address. So it says for one found host, identify top open ports quickly. Since ChatGPT is not going to execute these commands on our network, it doesn't know which hosts are up. So for example, if I type the command once again, which is the command from the previous prompt, which lists hosts that are online on my network, we can see that in my case, the device that I'm going to scan is going to be Metasploitable 3, which is up and running. In my case, I can see that the Metasploitable 3 has this IP address, which is .1.12. So I'm going to choose that IP address for the second command. And let's try it out. Nmap -- top ports, and let's use the 10 option. So we want to scan 10 open ports, and that's pretty much it. Let's just run it. Here it is. It gives us a result of top 10 ports and which ones are closed and which ones are open. So these are the top 10 most used ports, so that's why it outputted these 10. We get a few open ones and a few closed ones for the Metasploitable 3. If you're scanning a different device, you might get a different output. So for example, if you scan your router, the output will be different. If you're also scanning Metasploitable 3 like I am, the output should be the same. Alright, so quickly scans only the 10 most common ports on the chosen host to identify open services. Is this safe? Well, yeah, it's safe. It's not permitted to do a port scan on devices that you don't have permission to scan, but it is safe. It shouldn't do any damage to the device, like crashing it or something similar. And the third step is nmap -sv -- version-lite -- top ports 10 on the target host. So let's check it with the step 3 from our prompt. For that same host, grab lightweight version info for those ports. Okay, so this is pretty accurate. We're using the same target host, which will be, in my case, 192.168.1.12, and we're using the -sv flag, which is a flag for grabbing the version of a service on an open port, and we apply -- version light, which is what our prompt wanted. Grab lightweight version of info for those ports. Alright, so let's type it in. Nmap -sv -- let's first clear the screen so we can see everything better. Nmap -sv version -light -top -ports. We also use the 10 ports, and I will type my Metasploitable 3 IP address. Press enter. This command might take a few seconds longer to finish since we're using the -sv flag, but nonetheless it shouldn't take too long to finish, so let's just wait for it to complete. And here it is. We're getting the same 10 ports as the last command that we ran, but we're also getting this version column, which gives us the version of the services running on the ports that it found open, right? So we successfully completed the 3-step plan. We ran all 3 commands and we got exactly what we wanted. However, under the last one, it says, is it safe? It says yes. Now, while that is true, and we are collecting only lightweight service version info on the same ports without running any intrusive scripts, -sv can be considered a more in-depth scan, and sometimes on an older systems, it might present a problem or it might slow down that system. So it's arguably whether this is safe based on device that you're scanning. But in general, yes, it is safe. So we get what we wanted with this prompt. Alright, that would be about it for this introduction lecture to ChatGPT. You get the point. This is not how you want to give a prompt once you want accurate information and once you want technical information. This is a way that you should be giving prompts. Give it a task, give it constraints, and give it the output format that you want. Only then will you get accurate information. If you just type the prompt like this, which is give me an nmap command for a network scan, it will give you any random command with random flags, such as -ss, -sv, -d4. Maybe those are not the options that you wanted to run. So you need to be precise once giving prompts to ChatGPT. Alright, thank you for watching. That would be about it for this lecture, and we're going to continue with our prompts in the next lecture. See you there. Welcome back. Let's continue with our ChatGPT prompts. There are a few more examples that I want to show you before we get to the more advanced prompts. The first example is few-shot prompting for consistent formatting. So what's our goal with this prompt? We want to teach the model a format with a tiny example and then request a new item in the same format. How can we do that? Well, it's simple. We want to give a prompt first. Let's click on New Chat and let's type it like this. You are a security assistant. I want a consistent, minimal incident note format, right? And we want to give it an example. So let's type here is an example of the exact format to copy. And let's type it like this. So incident note. And then here we will have the title, SSH brute force attempts. Let's say that this is our example for the SSH brute force. We want to type in the scope and let's say lab VM only. Evidence would be ideally some lines from the actual log file. So let's try to reproduce those lines. So IP 192.168.1.5, let's say, and then let's say attempts 12. So let's say that this IP address tried to attempt 12 times over the SSH, and another IP 192.168.1.7 tried 5 times, right? So this is our evidence that we just made up, but it doesn't matter to ChatGPT. Summary is going to be one line, so one sentence, multiple failed SSH attempts observed against the VM. Next steps would be ideally the advice that ChatGPT gives us for this specific incident. So let's do it like this. Let's say the advice is block offending IPs at lab firewall and rotate lab credentials. And we want to end with this, right? So this is an example of how we want our incident notes to be printed. Let's paste it. Got it. I'll always keep that exact minimal format when writing incident notes for you. Alright, so we gave it an example, and now the next prompt that we want to give it is to produce a new incident note for a different incident. Let's give it a prompt like this. Now, produce a new incident note in the same format for, let's give it input, so title would be suspicious HTTP traffic, scope, let's say scope is once again lab VM only, evidence, and let's just tell it invent 2 realistic lines. So we want it to invent a realistic evidence for this incident. Once again, one sentence summary and 2 actionable next steps. Let's see what it gives us. Okay, here it is. We get the exact same output that we provided. Only one thing is different. It used this instead of dash, and next steps are indented under the evidence. So this is something that we would ideally want to fix in a few prompts, but for this specific moment it doesn't matter. We can see incident note, suspicious HTTP traffic, lab VM only, and it gave 2 realistic examples for the evidence that it just made up. So IP address, repeated HTTP requests to a certain web page, in this case admin login page, and post requests with unusual payloads. Also the amount of attempts and the summary in one sentence. Abnormal HTTP traffic patterns, targeting the VM's web service detected. Next steps. Review web server logs for potential exploitation attempts and apply latest security patches to web services and dependencies. Okay, so these are 2 steps that we should ideally take after we get this evidence. However, this one doesn't really make that much of a sense because we already got this from the logs, but maybe it tells us that we want to review the logs once again to see whether there are any other attempts or successful breaches that are captured in the log file. Alright, so what did we get from this? Well, the output will mirror the exact header lines and bullet structure that you provided besides this one. So you want to ideally give it another prompt that will say, do not indent the next steps under the evidence, and then it should have this exact format that you can use for whatever incident you want. This is maybe a format that you want to put in your report or that you want to send to other pen testers in your team. It doesn't matter. You can type whatever format you want, and ChatGPT will use it in the future for any incident that you type it. You can try to repeat this with a different topic and different structure to see whether it will work. Alright, now let's move on to another example, a different example than the ones we already covered. We're going to summarize sample logs into a simple table. So our goal will be to paste a short log snippet into ChatGPT, and we want to get a summary that students can reuse. So logs can sometimes be difficult to read. For example, if we open this sample log that I created, like this, it only has a few entries, but sometimes when there is a bunch of these entries, it can be difficult to detect the intrusion and it can be difficult to follow what's happening. In this case, it's quite simple because only 5 entries, and we can see that there are failed passwords for invalid users submitted from different IP addresses. So what we would conclude from this is that someone is trying to brute force SSH. We also have one entry which mentions that one password was accepted, but it's from a different IP address compared to the ones that get invalid entries. So what can we do with log file? Well, we can copy and paste it and send it over to ChatGPT to analyze it and give us a better output that we can actually read. Or in general, to just summarize the log file. So how can we do that? Well, let's type it here. You are a SOC summarizer. Summarize the failed SSH login attempts in the text below. We want to give it constraints. Ignore successful login attempts or successful logins. Group by source IP address and show count of failures. Output a 2-column markdown table with headers, IP, and let's say failed attempts, and then provide a 1-line summary for each of these. Or let's just leave it like this. We want it to provide a one-line summary. And in order for it to do this, we need to paste it the prompt, or the logs. We can paste it under the text, and we can go and cat the log file and copy these 5 lines. I'm just going to copy them. If the log file was actually realistic and much larger, you would copy much more logs than this, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we're just showcasing an example of what ChatGPT can be used for. We want to copy these 5 lines and paste it right here. Okay, once we do that, we can press enter. Okay, so here is our output. We get the 2 IP addresses and fail attempts number. Summary: 4 failed SSH login attempts observed from 2 source IPs. Let's check our log file to see if that is correct. The first one is from .1.5. It is a failed attempt. The second one is also a failed attempt from .1.5. The third one is a failed password for invalid user from .1.7. This one is accepted password, so if you notice in our prompt, we told it to ignore successful logins, so that one does not interest us. And the last one is failed password for the root user from once again .1.5. So that is 3 attempts from .1.5 and 1 attempt from .1.7. If we go back, that's exactly what ChatGPT outputted. Now, for this, it might not seem logical to use ChatGPT when we can just read this, but for much larger logs, it is useful to just throw it in ChatGPT, let it analyze and summarize the log file, and just output stuff like this. Imagine you have to read hundreds of lines of log files and read something like this. It would take you much longer, right? Alright, awesome. Now, let's showcase one more example before we move on to the next lecture, and that is a safety rewrite of an aggressive command. Our goal is to ask ChatGPT to refactor a risky nmap command into a safe version which we can run on our target. So for example, let's type it like this. You are a security assistant for a Kali Linux lab, right? Your task is to review the following command and provide a safer lab scoped alternative with the same goal. The command that we're going to provide is going to be an aggressive nmap command, which actually runs pretty much everything with -a option onto every port on the target machine, or in this case we can actually type on the entire subnet network. So -a also runs scripts, runs version scans, runs operating system scans. The -p- option mentions that we want to scan all 65,000 ports on the every device on the subnet. So quite an aggressive scan, which we do not want to run, and that's why we're going to provide constraints. Lab only, do not scan outside of the subnet that we provided. In this case it will be this one, or in my case it will be this one. Let's say keep runtime reasonable, under 5 minutes. Now, of course, you do not need to type all of these constraints that I'm typing. This is something that you alter every time you do a pen test, depending on what you want to do. Maybe you don't have a problem of running a scan for longer than 5 minutes, so you wouldn't write this in that case. This is just an example, so I'm going to leave it there. Reduce intrusiveness, and let's say no full -a scan over entire subnet. We don't want that, which is exactly what's happening in this command. Now, hopefully the ChatGPT will manage to find that that's what's happening here and give us a different command. Here is the type of output that we want, so we can actually, let's not put it under dash, let's put it like this. Output, we can do safer replacement command or commands, depending of whether that is one or more commands, in one code block. Number 2, one sentence rationale, so explaining why we use that, and one caution if applicable. So maybe it can't find a much safer command. So it has to give us a different command, and perhaps with that command, it has to give us a caution on what to pay attention for. So let's give it a try. All right, here it is. We only get one command, so one command was enough, and we get nmap-sv-p from 1 to 1000 on the entire subnet. So let's see whether it followed the rules. Lab only, which is this subnet, and in that case, this is correct. So this rule was followed. Keep runtime reasonable. Well, in order to keep runtime reasonable, you cannot really scan all 65,000 ports, as that can sometimes take much longer than regular 1000 ports can. So that's why instead of -p-, it used only first 1000 ports to scan, because it has to be under 5 minutes. Even with this scan, depending on your network speed, it might take longer than 5 minutes. And we told it to reduce intrusiveness and remove any -a scan over entire subnet, which is exactly what it did. Instead of -a scan, we use -sv scan, which doesn't perform the script scan, which is what we want. It's a less intrusive option to use, and we also get similar output as the -a scan, just without the scripts and operating system scan. Alright, now the rationale is limits the scan to the top 1000 ports with service version detection, reducing runtime and intrusiveness while still identifying active services in the lab subnet. This is it explaining why it used this command based on the rules provided, right? And the caution is, even with reduced scope, scanning may generate log entries or alerts on lab systems, which is fine. This just means that even once running this scan instead of this one, it might still get picked up by security measures on other systems, and it might generate log entries and alerts on those systems, which in our case is fine. So that would be about it for this lecture. We saw an example right here of how ChatGPT rewrites the intent and narrows scope and intrusiveness. In the previous example, we showcased how ChatGPT can be used to analyze and summarize log files for security assistance. And in the first example, let me just find it, we used few-shot prompting for consistent formatting. We provided it with a format that we want to use for our incident note, and then we gave it a different incident which it provided in that format. Alright, so that would be about it. These are the more simple examples which we showcase, so remember, the more we go on in the course, the more difficult it will get, especially once we get to Python programming, where we will write our own code and not use ChatGPT. But it's important that we start simple so we can get used to everything before we dive into more difficult stuff. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lecture.